Hi, Nancy, and everybody else who's watching from home. My name is Sarah Gutmann. I'm a professional genealogist. I'm the family tree climber, and I work for the company Legacy Tree. And today we're going to be talking about how to leave your own legacy for your family, but with the caveat that people are going to actually want to listen to it or to look at it. So something that people will actually enjoy and hopefully will be passed down through the generations, because as genealogists, I think that's one of our biggest fears is dying, and all that work that we've done, all that hard work we've done just completely goes to waste. So we want to kind of figure out some ways to trick people in there to listening, and so that they'll continue our work for us in generations to come. So I was thinking, I love musical theater. And I was thinking about this quote from Hamilton. Maybe you've seen it on Netflix or Disney Plus, or you've actually gone to the theaters to see it. But in the show, they said, when you're gone, who remembers your name? Who keeps your flame? Who tells your story? And that's a really big task that we as genealogists have inherited and have taken upon ourselves, is to be able to tell our ancestors' story. And how we tell that story is very likely how that person is going, or family is going to remember from generations onward. And also, who's telling our own stories? You know, are we leaving it up to chance? Are we also writing down just the events in our own lives, so that decades from now, will people be able to look back on our own journals or photos? Or are they going to also remember us from hearsay from other people? Because I think a lot of times we have to even just kind of stop for a second and write down the events of our own lives as we're recording those of our ancestors. Now, one of the big things, if you're doing genealogy for something that you just picked up or you've been doing it for decades, what's going to make it a passing hobby versus a lifelong obsession is that story element and being able to dive into that story. So much of genealogy is based on names, dates, and places. And those are extremely important because we're going to use those names, dates, and places to craft a story. But the real essence of who we are as individuals is not going to be on our birthday and our death day and when we were married or when we got so and so job, but it's the space in between. And I look at a tombstone. I remember, if you've ever heard of it, the poem The Dash, and it talks about what matters most of all is how we live our dash, that time in between the birth and death date, and trying to figure out what happened in that area to create a story for a person. So as we consider those things, we're going to not just kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we want to use those names, dates, and places as our guide. So we're going to research the history of the time and place that our ancestors lived in. For example, living in Long Island in March 2020 is very different from living on Long Island in 2019 versus 1950s, 1776, whatever. Also, too, living in the Midwest is going to give you a much different story than living in urban New York. So we want to be able to know what's going on in a particular time and place. And knowing the events that made up that time period is really going to make up who we were. I think especially, for New Yorkers, being a New Yorker during 9/11 was a very different experience than living in Nebraska at the time. And I think for all of us, a very, historically moving event is going to change who you are as a person and be a very, very integral part of your story. So we want to be historians as well as genealogists and try to figure out what's going on during a certain time period and intertwine that story into the story that we're telling. Now, this is a big task. We have hundreds of people in our family tree, so many stories to tell, but we have a really big challenge though. We have a challenge And the challenge is that the average person's attention span is 0 to 7 minutes. I used to be a classroom teacher. I was a classroom teacher for 10 years. I remember my first day in college learning to be a teacher. My professor made us write down that the average attention span was 0 to 7 minutes, and to never, ever forget that. And if you have ever talked to your family about genealogy or your family history, I think we want them all to sit there kind of like that scene from The King and I, when they're so attentive and they can't wait to hear the words coming out of your mouth. But in reality, they'll politely listen for maybe a few minutes, and then they're back on their phones and they're doing whatever that they're, whatever games they're playing, and they're distracted again. So we want to be able to get that information to people, but also be accepting ourselves that our audience is not going to have that great time span interest in here. So there's a solution to this. And the solution is brought to you by Melissa Cupcakes. If you've ever had these cupcakes, I love these cupcakes. They're these tiny little things. And you look at these, and this is not a commercial for Melissa's Cupcakes, but I invite you to go and try them if you haven't yet. If you look at these cupcakes, if you've ever tried them, they're just bite-sized, and you can get a really big burst of flavor. And just looking at these cupcakes, I'm reminded of those flavors, and I can in my head think about what they are, and it's just enough. You still want more, but you also feel satisfied that you've tasted this flavor. So we want to try to create bite-sized bits of family history to pass down to our family, and just little by little pass these stories down, and hopefully they'll start getting absorbed by our other family members. So how are we going to get started doing that? Well, there's a couple different things you want to think about when you're planning out how you're going to tackle this bite-sized information. We want to find out or ask ourselves, whose story are you going to tell? Don't start with, I'm going to tell 8 generations of my family history, because I tried to do that. And I created a book on ancestry when they had the they had this ancestry, which I'll talk about, canvas plan, where you could take your information from ancestry and you could create a book online. Well, mine right now, if I was to print it, is over $400. And I just cannot pull the trigger on that, because to me, there's always so much more stuff to do. And, I would hate to spend $400 and then, I got to fix something, or there's something else I could add. So I haven't done it. It's just sitting there in outer space. And the goal is, though, to create something that's small enough that you can be happy with this product and you can pass it on and go on to something else. So do you want to tell the story of a specific individual? Do you want to do a group, a family group? And by family group, we're thinking a family of origin. So are we doing parents, child, and then do you want to then go on to their marriage families and their children? Do you want to create or look at a direct line of ancestors? Do you want to just trace right back to the paternal line? Maybe a line that came from a certain country. Who are you going to be focusing on? That's the first question you want to ask yourself. And what's good about these bite-sized plans is you could tackle a lot of them right off the bat. Just start getting going. You don't have to think, okay, I'm just going to do this person. I'm going to spend the rest of my life focusing on this one individual, this one group. It's just for now. Who are you going to focus on? And then the question is going to be, what am I going to focus on with this person? Am I going to give a summary of their entire life story? Was there something very exciting about them, a particular time period that I want to cover? Maybe they're coming to America. Were they involved in a war? Either war was happening in their country. Did they fight in a war? A coming of age story, meeting a spouse, a job. What are we going to be focusing on here? And some ancestors are going to lend themselves to better stories than others. Our immigrant ancestors in and of themselves have their own story. Anybody who's fights in the war, they also come with a story. Everybody comes with a story. Some are just a little bit more easier to get information off of. And then the next thing is we're going to pick our media. How are we going to present this story to other generations? So there's a few different media things, and we'll focus on that right now. And this one I actually got from my mother-in-law. And my mother-in-law, she's not a genealogist, but she loves scrapbooking and she loves creating cookbooks. She has a nice shelf full of them. And you could do this either if you're a scrapbook person, you could do it that way, or you can go on a few different websites, have it so it's more computerized, digitized, and you're just pushing some buttons, and I'll talk about that. But cookbooks are a good use of presenting this information because, one, everybody loves food. And it's something that can be referred to often. People going into cookbooks and looking at recipes and having little stories on the side. And you can make these pretty easily because there's so many great computer softwares out there. They're cheap enough and they're easy to distribute. They make great Christmas presents, or at least I think they make good Christmas presents to give people. And it's something that could be passed down for generations. And if you think about it, all the stories that have just been shared over time are around the table, and really families just coming together and growing and changing in that time period, sharing family meals, holidays, whatever. So I'll tell you a little something about myself. I am an awful cook. I don't do cooking. I just actually got upstairs right before this, my box from Home Chef. So my husband does the cooking, but you don't have to be a cook to be able to do this. And there's some cheating there. Secrets to success. Now, if you come from a good line like myself of families who also doesn't cook, you can make up recipes, because we have this great thing called the internet, and you can go on and you can get recipes that you think would be interesting that maybe someday, somewhere, somebody's going to want to make, and include those recipes. I actually just had for my for my job for Legacy Tree, they asked all the employees to provide 3 recipes from their own family. Well, don't tell anybody, but I just went online and found stuff because my family doesn't cook. But I wrote little stories about my family in there, and how I thought maybe the meals would tie into our family. So you don't have to use your own stuff. And when you're doing these cookbooks, kind of look for a theme that you can go with. So my mother-in-law, she has one just of appetizers. She has one of desserts. You can do one for different ethnicities, maybe your German family, some German recipes versus Italian ones, whatever. Look for, this is always kind of a fun thing, look for recipes that were popular in the time period, but still appeal to modern day. So maybe you're doing a recipe for your family who fought in the American Revolution. Thomas Jefferson has a pretty good recipe for ice cream that you could use. And you can find that online, or George Washington's hoe cakes, put those in there. So also find recipes that reflect one of your nationalities. Hopefully, maybe you come from a nationality that is known for their culinary skills. And you don't have to just stop at one type of cookbook. Like I said, you can just keep going with it, make it so that it's bite-sized, maybe on this, when you're going to do your Italian ancestors or people from this time period, and go on from there. So something that it might look like is something like this. So this is a picture of my grandma, who she just passed away in December. She was 92. And my dad, who looks absolutely nothing like this now. He's a 300-pound man. He would be squishing her. So dad on grandma's lap. And so I wrote a little story about my experience with my grandparents, just a little something reminiscing. So I put, every July we packed up into the car and we drove 10 hours to Grandma and Grandpa's house in Cary, North Carolina. Grandma always kept the house in pristine condition. Rooms which belong in museums rather than a house were blocked off with a gate with vacuum marks on the rug to ensure that nobody dared enter. Our days were spent with grandpa entertaining us in the pool. And meanwhile, grandma, who insisted that she was allergic to the sun, which I totally made up, she made up, I think, spent the afternoons in the kitchen with the soap operas playing in the background, preparing supper, which is eaten at exactly 5 p.m. So I didn't really go into grandma's history or whatever, but I think that's important for people to just get a glimpse of what my childhood was like, what my relationship was with my grandparents, and to pass that on. I did write down that they lived in Cary, North Carolina. Um, I actually did I read I did not even write that their names were Charlie and Nancy, but still, I don't think that that's necessarily important. It's more of just that story and that relationship that's there. And it's something that's short. They can look at it when they're reading other things and they can remember that and pair it with a picture. And what's really great if you have that opportunity is share a, if you have it in their actual handwriting, include that recipe into there. My grandma did pass down several recipes to me, and I do have that, and that's, her handwriting. I can read that very easily, but you may want to also transcribe that for future generations or any generations because we're losing that art of knowing script. So definitely print that down or else that's going to be lost in to the ages. Another thing that you could do is a drink book, if you prefer that, something, a bar book. And this is an example of a an old fashioned. I just got this online. I didn't know the recipe of old fashioned, but I thought that this fit with the story. So I put here, in the 1920s, prohibition swept through America, but the 18th Amendment didn't stop Charles Rocco Guidotti and Helen Ivanko from dancing late into the night at speakeasies in Yonkers, New York. The young couple married on May 6, 1928, and decades later, Charlie and Helen still had the reputation of throwing a few back and laughing and dancing at a club on Friday nights. And that's true. Those are my great grandparents, and that's how they spent their weekends. And I'm telling you when they got married, and I'm putting them in a time period. I'm giving you that sense of this is what they were doing during Prohibition. And so there was that extra sense of, I guess, secrecy, undercover, that they were kind of going against the law and having a good time that way, just to kind of give you a sense of who they were as a people. So that's one way of doing it, is creating a cookbook. Another way that you can tell the stories is create a story photo album, and think of this kind of as like a coffee table book, a small coffee table book that can be easily picked up. Conversation can be had. Oh, this is so cool. Let's look at this and let's move on with our day. So for a story photo album, you're going to want to pick a person or a family. This is not the time to do 8 generations back. I mean, you can if you want to, but again, that kind of goes against that whole small bites situation. And this is a really good way of using both pictures and documents to tell a story. Cookbooks, I would say, try to avoid those heavy documents, but this is a good spot for it. And with these story photo albums, you're going to want to strive for about 20 to 40 pages. Anything more than that, people feel extremely bombarded by. Most people, not me, but they just want something quick that they can look through. So I'll share with you a few pages of a book that I started making for my great grandpa. So this is my great grandfather right here. This is his brother Rogers, and that's his brother Thomas. So this is a book about my great grandpa and his experience in the war. So just a little something here. So the Paul brothers off to war. The horrors of war do not show themselves in this picture, and not everyone who dies from war dies on the battlefield. After he got home from Europe, Rogers Paul Center took a gun to his head on the steps of the old White Plains White Plains courthouse. But to his dismay, the bullet did not end his life. He spent the remaining decades trying to drink his pain away. So he shot himself in the head, but unfortunately, he just caused a lot of damage. Thomas Paul, my grandmother's favorite uncle, tried to return to a normal life, but the mustard gas had damaged his lungs. 4 years after the armistice, Thomas's lungs filled with air for the very last time. Harold Paul left for the war a carefree man until he received a letter from a Catherine McColgan, a woman who he had a one-night stand with, informing him that she was pregnant. Harold spent his year in service writing letters that would go unanswered, asking about the pregnancy and inquiring about the unknown child. That unknown child is my grandma. So there's three stories here about the family and obviously how they intertwined with each other. So something you could put in here is this is my great grandpa's discharge papers and his enlistment papers. So just a little place you can look at that. You can put something over on the side if you want in the margins to maybe explain this a little bit more. And then I looked for some information about the actual company that he served in, the actual regiment that he served in. And for your ancestors that fought in the military, a lot of times you can find some really great information about those companies, those regiments on Google Books. And they'll give a detailed description of the battles that they were fought and who was in them. So this is just a picture of, this is, I think is really cool. It's kind of like the Hindenburg, that blimp. That's the actual blimp that he was the mechanic for in the 43rd Balloon Company in World War I, and a little bit of a description about, what was going on during that time period. And then also too, I included letters from war. My great grandma, I don't know why she never answered him, but she saved his letters. They had a very tumultuous relationship. They ended up kind of just separating eventually. But he writes to her just about his battle over in France. And he asks about how's the baby doing? Do you have a name picked out for the baby? I'm guessing that she's been born by now. I don't know. And being able to see these letters here, this interchange between my great grandparents, I think tells you so much more than they were married at this date and place. I think in our heads we think, oh, they're happy couples and they move on with their lives. But again, like this is a very, they had not a great relationship. So just being able to include some of this stuff in there and thinking about, wow, our ancestors, I also don't think we think of them as having like these one night stands, being these actual people with feelings and events that happen to them. So when you're with all these things, you kind of want to find like a hook. What's going to get people interested? You want to pick the interesting things in their lives, not that, she goes down to the CVS every day and grabs a newspaper and then comes home or whatever. You want to grab like the hook to get your people interested. Another thing that you can do is write short stories. Just a few pages. You can do a chapter if you want to do it like that, and have some fun with this. Think about whose point of view are you going to tell your story from. One of my things that I started doing is writing some short stories and taking it from the woman's perspective. Because I think so often, just the media and history themselves, I think it's all told by the man's perspective, and getting it a glimpse from the woman, I think it's a little easier because I am a woman and kind of putting myself in that situation and writing it from that way. So think about whose point of view are you going to tell it from? Are you going to tell it as though you were one of the characters? Are you going to be one of this omnipresent narrator? How are you going to tell it? And again, you can change this from story to story, play around with it, have some fun. What you're going to want to do is gather up as much documentation as you can find about that individual. Look at your records, research your history of the time, place, what's going on in that time period, and incorporate this information into the documents, into your short story. And give yourself liberty. You want to kind of strive to go for a historical fiction rather than a biography. I think if we get tied down with thinking, I got to write this biography, you get into that mindset. Am I doing this right? Would this person really approve of this? At least this is what I think. But if you go for historical fiction, you're allowing yourself to have that literary license and kind of play around with things. So this is a little story that I wrote about my great 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 grandmother, Carmella. And the story behind her is that I've mentioned this before, I think in some of my talks, is she was married to my great great grandfather. They had kids over in Italy. He came over to America and he got married to an American woman over here. He had listed that she was dead, his wife. Carmela, then it looks like she came to surprise him in America because she hadn't heard from him in a while. She came over with her brother and found that he had said that she was dead. And, she was from family history that she was devastated by this, like obviously so. So this is a little telling the story from her point of view. I tried to do it. So I said, death. I learned that death is not limited to when breath ceases to enter and exit your body. I have the power to end someone's existence just as they have chosen to end mine. I was brought into being in September of 1841. At 43, my mother, Rose Semino, was later on in her birthing years. My siblings, Lorenzo and Cecilia, the twins, were 11 years old by the time that I came around. 9 years after my birth, my brother Carmine appeared. Sometimes I felt as valuable as the chickens who wandered our farm in Ponstiglione. My father, he says farmer though, my father Carmen was a farmer, just like his father and his father before him. Everyone in our small town village is or was related to one another. Therefore, not much thought was given when my father was approached by Antonio Frigetta. Antonio and his wife, Carmen Abalone, were looking for a wife for their fourth and youngest child, Vincenzo. So I didn't go into how he killed her off and that whole thing. But what I did was I took some of the records that I had and I used that to provide you with information about where she fell in line with her family, what the names of her family was. I looked into a little bit in the town of Italy. Something that was common there was chickens that these farmers had. These different records tell you the occupations of the family. So I wasn't making that up. That's all true stuff. And you can put that in there, so it's not saying I was born in blah, blah, blah. I think a lot of times we go into that mode. And sometimes even too at work, I have to stop myself from doing that because it's easy and kind of spice it up because we want to remember that we have an audience that wants to learn about this and they don't want to be bored. So some helpful sites that can get you going with creating some of these cookbooks, picture books, narratives are createmycookbook.com. And by the way, there's discount codes for all these things. If you Google discount codes for the site, createmycookbook.com is really good because they have all the different formats on there and the different recipe layouts and distribution stuff. They give you ideas. It's a really cool site. Along with that, heritage cookbooks, which are geared towards actually genealogy stories with that. And mixed books is also part of that. You can do mixed books for photo books and cookbooks. They have the two options there for that. And then there's Shutterfly and Snapfish if you want to do a storybook. Even if you wanted to just create a short story, you can write that on your computer and you can go to Staples and they can create a cover for you and put some nice binding on it. And it doesn't cost very much. So, you're not seeking out Random House or anything to publicize the book, but just go to Staples and they have some resources for you there. A really cool thing is if you want it, this is one of those things that I wish somebody would give to me because I just think it's a cool idea. And now that I'm saying it's actually my birthday tomorrow, so I might ask my husband for this because, he's been asking what to get me. Is this thing is called Storyworth and it's a subscription. And it's $100. And I think it's a really cool product because what this does is it sends you prompts. Every week it sends you prompts and you write these prompts. You write to it and it creates a book for you and you can add photos in it. It's a nice hardcover book and it gives you at the end of the year. This is I think a really good gift if you have somebody who would do it. My aunt did this. My aunt likes genealogy like I do. And for Christmas 2 years ago, I went in and I handpicked the different questions I wanted to ask her. And, about the family, about her stuff growing up, about my mom, whatever. And she answered them. And it was, she said she really enjoyed it. I asked my grandpa if he would do this. He's 92 years old. That's the guy I really want to have do this. And he was like, nah, I'm too busy. So I don't know what he's busy with. He won't do it. And he said he'd waste it. So I didn't get it for him. So if you're going to ask somebody to do this, it's a great product, but just make sure they're going to do it because you don't want to waste their money. And the way that they do that is once a week, this company will email you several questions or a question based on you, the person giving it, how much you want to ask them. And they can just reply to the email. And at the end of the year, everything is put into a book. They can edit the book. They can put pictures in the book. And it's really nice. So that's one way you can share it. Another thing you could do with sharing your family tree is use it in decorations for your house. I don't know if you could see over me, but right here on my side here, I have a family tree that's right here. It's a 7-generation family tree, and it costs $30 to make. And because it costs $30 to make, I don't mind updating it every year or two if I find something, something new that I wanted to put on there, mainly with my husband's side. My side's pretty much done. But you can create a decorative family tree. And the way you could do this is you go on Ancestry. Go on to Ancestry and you go into extras. This is on everybody's Ancestry account. You don't have to have a paid subscription to do this. It's free if you just create a tree on Ancestry. Go into extras and go into where it says photo books and posters. So you go into photo books and posters and you're going to get this website basically here. And it says, do you want to start a family history book or do you want to do a family history poster? The poster is what I have right back here. And there's a few different options for it, for how many generations you want. I think it starts at like 3 generations, but you can go up to maybe 9 or 7. If you go down, I don't have grandchildren, so I don't, if you have grandchildren, you can add more generations that way. But it's a great thing if you want, and it's a conversation piece. At least I make it a conversation piece because I'll be like, look at my tree. So there's also that family history book. And that's what I had mentioned earlier that I started on here. That's now over $400 that I have yet to pull the trigger on. So this can be very expensive because you pay by the page. Whereas I think Snapfish and Shutterfly is a little bit cheaper and it's kind of the same thing.
Not really.
Oh, okay. So then don't do that. Whatever.
My son's mother-in-law, she did a book for she does one every year for my granddaughter.
Okay.
And so I get a copy of it. I pay for it, and was $175.
Oh my gosh.
And it's a big book, but it's like 1 year in her life.
Wow.
But it's a lot of photos. So, and then she takes pictures from us. So I was cursing her out. And I really had to go hunt down all these photos. But because of hunting down all these photos, I found some great things that helped me with my research.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
Yeah, but but they're wonderful, and that's what I'm thinking about doing for my families. And it's hard to figure it all out.
Yeah. It really is. Even like we talk about making time for yourself. Passing on your stuff. My kids are 6 and 7. I stopped. I have a whole bunch of stuff for them on my phone, but I have not made any of these photo books. I have them for my great grandparents,
Right.
But I don't have them for my own kids because my whole thing is I'll get to that later.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to do that. Everything's in boxes, but I'm opening the boxes now that I'm old.
That's great,
Yeah.
though,
Yeah.
And to document everything.
Yeah.
In addition to the stuff, if you find things as you're looking for things, I just got this. My mom sent it. I wasn't supposed to peek, but whatever I did because she's not here. It's called Shotbox. Have you heard of that?
No.
For taking pictures. You find old documents. You can buy it at Michael's. And it's basically a box that folds down and there's lights inside of it. And it gets it so that you have like picturesque, a picturesque way without a glare of taking pictures of documents, photos, and objects. So you could put that like in your family tree and any of these things. So I'm really looking forward to playing with that.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and I'm gonna redo a lot of my old pictures that I had because you could see that glare on there.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it's called Shopbox, and it's at Michael's. I think you use like the coupon, 40% off coupon for it or whatever
Yeah.
to
Right.
play around with. Another fun things, and my my sons were actually doing this
I,
last night.
I did this.
Oh, the Google Earth thing.
Yeah.
My son, well, he's 7 years old, and he with the Google Earth, he finds places in our neighborhood, and he drops like the little man there, and then he walks his way down the streets, like to try to find his way home. And I was like, that's extremely impressive.
Yeah.
But Google Earth is a great way of getting your family interested in your ancestral homes,
Right.
um,
Or not.
or not. Yeah,
Because the Kunta Ora, if you've ever, I always wanted to go to Czechoslovakia to see the old country. And then
yeah,
I looked at the town on Google Earth
yeah.
where they live. And I don't want to go there.
No, I have yet to find a place. I have yet to find a town my family was from that I actually want to go to. I'm like, this looks awful.
Yes.
I
There's
know
a
why they
reason they
left.
left.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, where are these like picturesque things of Italy? These beautiful vineyards or whatever. All these are like back alley stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can play around with that. You could show them, this is where our family would have, our family lived. Some of these places, in these old villages, they look like they probably did, 300 years ago or wherever they were, at the time period.
Right. Yep.
Um, and even my father loves this because he likes to go on this and look at like his aunts and uncles' houses that they had, and he critiques them about, he hates the shrubs that they put in or the shutters, the color. So definitely a fun thing to do. I think also if you have, the younger generation, their kids, grandkids, and get them playing around with it.
Yeah.
You can also then trick your family into having things and learning about objects by creating heirlooms and making things, of importance to them. My grandpa is going through my grandma's stuff, and he's been sending down boxes of like little knick-knacky things, but I for the life of me, like I just can't throw them out because like my grandpa gave them to me, and like they were my
Right.
grandma's and they were her mother's before.
Yep.
So what I did is I created, I put them, I have them in a box behind me over here, some of them, but I put them in Ziploc bags, and I took an index card and I wrote whose they were and what the meaning of this was. And my idea is when my sons are older and they have events in their lives, I'll give them their great great grandfather's Swiss Army knife. Like that's something that I think is really cool, and give it to them so that they pass that down and they feel a connection with that. And make sure you write down the story, because so many times people pass this down and they're like, is this important? I have no idea who this was.
Yes.
My
Right.
mother has an entire house full of that. She's like, I either got this on sale at the outlets or like it's great, Aunt Helen's. And I'm like, okay, well, whose is this?
Right.
Are we throwing this out? Or are we keeping it? What's going on here? So also heirlooms, especially if you celebrate holidays, Christmas ornaments, anything like that. Holidays really lend themselves to creating heirlooms, creating those pieces that we see over and over every year. And think outside the box. But buttons, actually, some of these are kind of dated, which look cool. Pens, jewelry, statues, whatever. Actually, I have right behind me, my grandpa gave me my grandma's box that she got in the 1930s, and she kept it on her dresser, and she kept her curlers in there every single night, and she did her hair in those. So it's well worn. It's a cigar box, but just something like that, like passing that down through the generations. And then you can also bring your family into the 21st century. You can create, if you're daring enough, you can go on Facebook and you can create kind of a group of descendants. I have a great one from my great grandparents. We've all kind of gotten together over ancestry DNA tests, and there's a Facebook group. And I think there's about 30 members, and you never would have met these people otherwise. And people share photos of their ancestors, their current family. And it's funny to see on Facebook these people who these distant cousins, and you could see, oh, he has her nose and like
Yeah.
that similar looks of things, and even the interest that they have or sense of humor, and you get this connection to them. And or Instagram, share photos of your family on there, and just try to not bombard people with them, but make it like a pleasant experience, not like, oh God, here comes Sarah, I gotta have to sit here and talk to her about my dead family for the next 5 hours. Let them know I'm just going to talk for about 5 minutes and then we'll move on, about
Yeah.
whatever we watch on TV. So make it palatable, make it enjoyable. And yeah, that's pretty much the whole. Any questions, comments? Usually there's other people here, so we talk more.
Right. I know that with my relatives, they get excited about the scandals.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's fun because we have a lot of scandals in the families.
Yeah, that's
So,
like exactly what I'm talking about. Like, get those hooks in there.
yeah, so that's what they're interested in mostly. My husband's nephew was going to London a few months ago with his wife. His wife had to go there for a business meeting, but of course during the Omicron that got canceled, and they were upset because I have an ancestor who was a famous artist, Samuel Prout, and he used to do all these watercolors, and he's a very famous artist. And it's at most of his work is at the Tate Museum. So I wanted them to go when they were in London to go and look at the Tate, to go see this and see if they could get some information for me about him. And they were so upset that they couldn't go. And they were more upset that they couldn't go because of me not getting the information.
Aww.
I was like, I'll find it online. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Oh, that's cute though.
Yeah. But it's interesting though, all the different things that you can find.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even too, like, just debunking myths, even just kind of proving things like this is not true also.
Yes.
Too, is kind of interesting. I remember when Ancestry first started and they gave the thing about these are all the famous people you are related to. Did you ever experience that?
Well, I am. There's a lot of people.
They told me I was, and I'm not, but just kind of debunking that stuff.
Right. No, I have like a lot. It's unbelievable, with my ancestry, even my husband's. Right now I'm working on Mabel the Poisoner from 930 AD. And that's on his site. And she was a very famous person, and he's descended from her. And I said, see, I could tell.
That's awesome. How did you figure that out?
I worked very hard on my research.
What did you say? 980? That was the year?
930 AD. 930 AD.
Mabel the Poisoner?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm gonna have to go look that up now.
Oh, it's fascinating. But no, I mean, I get, I go on Ancestry, and I have a big tree on that, and I research everyone. I do the factual research behind it. So I've been pretty lucky, and because famous people, they were recorded back. Important people were recorded, like poisoners, but and you can go back further and further, and it's very exciting.
Yeah,
when you get
really
there.
cool.
Yeah,
I